Okay, if you continue, you're going to go into sexual use, manipulation, and exploitation, degradation of youth. Why? Because pornography tends downward, and I want people to understand this. Picture an hourglass, how an hourglass has a V shape right down to the middle where it becomes very small. All of pornography is like that. It starts with adult. Don't ever let someone tell you they've always been attracted to children. That is a lie. How can we say that? They're the world's greatest liars. You can't believe anything that comes out of their mouth. Thank you. Okay, so every one of them were attracted. They started with adult porn. They started with these same categories, but it progresses down to what the inmates will call, the sex offenders will call, barely legal. That is where adult women want to look young, and you see young children being dressed up to look older. And it converges at about the age of 13. Barely legal, but barely legal is what? Actually should be 17. Okay? It is at that point that you will separate out, this sounds strange, the regular sex offenders from the pedophiles. The regular sex offenders will not go further, though they start looking at material that's taking them younger, and then all of a sudden, this sounds strange, but they will awaken and be shocked by themselves, and they will stay with adult porn, but they'll still do heinous things or manipulative things. I'm not minimizing their offenses. But how can you tell this? Because when you have all these different men in one group, you can see it on their face. But with the pedophiles, they didn't stop. They continued down. And so now we're into this category. So you're going to have, I add this category, the one sexual use, manipulation, and exploitation. Okay. But if someone continues down, now it's the degradation of youth. So I tried to show here, it's not clear at face value on this chart now that I'm rereading it, but you will have these two categories. This is where the separation takes place of pedophiles versus non-pedophiles. But for instance, when you look at the serial rapist murderers, Jeffrey Dahmer, when you look at Bundy, BTK killer, Hillside Strangler, virtually every single serial rapist murderer will almost have exclusively adult victims, which shows you how vile the pedophiles are. Now, I've had some people, somebody had, BTK killer killed 2 kids because they actually saw and witnessed what was going on. Somebody said, but Ted Bundy, a 13-year-old, okay. But how many women, adults? So we're talking 99% of the victims of serial rapist murders are going to be adult women. Now, teenage, late teens, typically. So my contention is this: a pedophile is a bloodless serial murderer. I mean, he's murdering the soul. And that's why they have so many victims. They far surpass the numbers of victims that quote unquote regular sex offenders have. Sexual degradation, I'm reading down, the violence of adults, CI detective stories. You see that a lot with the serial rapists and murderers. They read that kind of stuff. There's BDSM, I reverse those letters. There's bestiality down there. Bribes and secrets are used to gain the victim's silence. Those are kids, typically. Calculated sexual rape. I'm moving to the next category, second to last. Calculated sexual rape and use of children for purposes of personal power and control, as well as adults in this sexual deviance, profit, and ego satisfaction. People can go back and watch this. But at the very right, cold, calculated, methodical, and strategic raping of the child or adult. Okay, but look at what happens. They get into the thrill of the chase. There's a big difference. Motivated by the thrill of the chase, cat and mouse, the ability to fool those who would try to stop him. Folks, when you see men dressing in women's underwear and drag and going into private spaces, why do they take photographs of themselves? Women don't do that when they're dressed as men. It's the men. Why? It's the same reason why you see TikTok videos of these men masturbating in the women's room, because they are at this category. Those are the same ones that want into rape shelters and women's prisons and women's sports, it's not to win medals, it's to gain access to the showers and locker rooms. What is the process downward? There's a layering effect. Here's those same ranges. You've got misdemeanor, low-level felonies, sexual perpetrator. You notice that comes right out of that one. Okay, again, misdemeanors, low-level offenses. I kept the top categories. Now we're going to show under moral disposition. Now we're going to do the layering effect in terms of this is how somebody becomes a pedophile. They're going to become personality disordered, but they're going to be sophisticated. Why? That is a long-standing way of approaching life and people, meaning that's who they are. It's fixed now. Then they become profoundly sexually twisted, warped, and deviant. So first, it's a personality disorder. Now, somebody could say, well, John, you just said it's not antisocial personality. Correct. But how about narcissism? You layer narcissism with all sorts of stuff, and you're going to start to have ego that grows. Driven by sexual gratification. Once somebody achieves that, then you layer it with what? Actively seeks to sexually defraud and steal. Once somebody's doing that, they're crossing more boundaries. Now they're going to create a situation where the victim is unable or unwilling to consent. Pedophiles will always play with the word consent. After they get over on boundaries and you can't stop them, then they meet the criteria for what? Pedophile. And then either they're staying focused now on kids because that's the most fun, so to speak, in terms of traumatizing, but also what's happening with women at the same time. That is why just because a man on paper has only sexually offended kids, how many women has he already sexually offended? So they are into dominance and degrading of women. They have no empathy or conscience. There's the psychopathy, and they have a desire to generate trauma. And by that time, they really have a desire to defile kids. And here are the ranges of categories of sex offenders. You notice along the top, you have low intensity, moderate intensity, and high intensity sex offender. You have those different categories. Those will receive different levels of treatment, which is really duration and topics covered. But again, I'll go through the categories and then we'll be finished. There may be a couple others I'll show you real fast. So you have the developmentally stuck, the young and the dumb. They need to grow up. They need to mature, and the offending will stop. Okay, ego-driven, foolish, or opportunist. There's the self-styled playboy or stud. They need to repent. And they need to take seriously their accountability. And they need to realize that no more of this stuff whatsoever. Okay? Again, we call that low intensity, self-absorbed and self-entitled. There's hope for low intensity sex offenders. So when people ask me, are they able to be rehabilitated? It depends upon what category. But you can end up now with static 99, and here's my concern about that. You can have what should be high-intensity sex offenders, now pedophiles that are rated as what? If the evaluator doesn't know what they're doing, you could take someone who's a child offender and rate them as low intensity. And I think for right now, that'll probably be enough. So, Tanya, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and so we can interact.
Yeah, I'm sitting here taking all kinds of notes. And
I think I've almost used up all our time.
That's okay. You know what? We were going to shoot for 90 minutes. And if it's another 2 hours, like I say, I know the feedback that we received from the first show. And I think that this information is so critical and so vital. I don't know anybody else that's providing this kind of information and these kinds of graphs that you have displayed tonight. And what's going through my mind, and maybe it's going to be going through some of our viewers' minds, is that we're looking at what's going on in our schools. We're seeing that there's no doubt that our kids are being groomed, that the schools and the education system have been infiltrated by, I'm going to say it, sexual deviants, individuals who have looked for this opportunity to get closer to children. And I am just sitting here on the magnitude of what we're facing. What do we do? How do we address this? Because, as you know, and our viewers know, most people know what Action for Canada is doing as far as exposing the darkness. And I do believe that that's critical. And I think that it is definitely having an impact, because they were very clever, because they were very patient over these last couple decades as they've incrementally implemented this plan in breaking down, as the common word is becoming now, of the societal norms. And in 2000, I read back as far as 2004 today, about I can't remember his name right now, but he was in the article that I produced, of how in 2004 he was a teacher, and there was a boy that was spending a lot of time with the girls, and so he thought, and he was being teased and bullied over it, and so he thought it would be a good time for him to go and have a conversation with that boy and to talk to all of them about what it meant to be gay. And so he's made it his life endeavor since 2004 to get into the school system, to promote the SOGI, and to the point where now he is, helping to instruct and recruit SOGI leads at the University of British Columbia. And that's how insidious it is in society right now. Our experience that with the notice of liability that we've had against the sexual orientation and gender identity, the books, the gay straight alliance clubs, those gay straight alliance clubs, where again they're indoctrinating kids into these groups and binding their breasts and having personal time with them and telling them not to discuss it with their parents, and then bringing in the drag queens as well. This whole system has just morphed and blown up in our faces, and I feel like it was in the dark, and now they've gone too far, they've overstepped, and by us moving into the school boards, by us being present, by us raising up in opposition, we are beginning to turn the tide. But is there something more that we can do? Because to me, it's horrifying.
The best thing that you can do is, first of all, educate people. And so hopefully even this program can be a means of doing that. People need to understand the nature of sexual deviance, and they need to understand what sexual predators are like. Because there's a lot of myths out there. As a matter of fact, I recommend my site, churchprotect.org. The reason I'm recommending that is that was my original training site. It still is. But churchprotect.org has, there we go, has up at the top, sorry, if you want to go back up at the top, you'll see some tabs. One is myths. I recommend you start there. Go into the myths tab, you will see a lot of myths that will counter what I call urban legends that have come from the literature from poor research. Your research is, especially in the social sciences, your research is only as good as how you do that, or your methodology. And if you approach the issue of researching sex offenders and researching sexual deviance, if you approach it like we would any other endeavor, you're going to have flawed and skewed and false results. Why? Because you're dealing with men by nature that are deceptive, because they are deviant, because they have a goal in mind. So if you take at face value the average person, that's social science. You can say, well, 4 out of 5 people say this. But if you are dealing with those that hunger and thirst after defiling the most vulnerable, who want to be able to have even greater equal direct access, then they have an agenda. And they love the fact that as they are talking, you're taking notes because you're quoting them and you're taking that as gospel. They are spinning you. They're using you as a useful idiot. They're playing you for fools. So predators, perpetrators, pedophiles know us better than we know them, because they once had a conscience. And their goal is to flip sympathies, to switch the sympathies away from survivors and vulnerable women and children onto the deviant men. Deviant men do not need our sympathies. Okay, so would I say this, and ultimately here's the answer in my estimation. Everyone needs to take a high bar approach when it comes to protecting vulnerable women and children. You don't compromise on that. You can compromise on a lot of things, but the safety of women and children trump the sensitivities of porn accessing men. What do I mean, porn accessing men? It's simply this. In this day and age, what percentage of men access porn? Probably over 90%. And that's probably underrated as well, because how do they find that out? They ask. Well, not everybody's going to be really honest. So the vast majority of men, even quote unquote normal men that are family men, that hold down stable jobs and they're philanthropic and all that, are accessing porn. The one thing that is true about pornography is if a man accesses it, he's going to start to become different. You move down that slippery slope. Well, when you meet a man, do you know what he's been doing the night before? No. The only way you know that is in prison, by the way, because there's 24/7 monitoring. So the only way really to do effective sex offender research is to have your office where? Not in the ivory tower of academia, but where? In a prison for years. Now, it doesn't mean that an academic can't derive meaningful information, but again, if I don't understand the nature of sexual deviance, if I don't understand psychopathy, if I don't understand sex offending, if I don't understand what pornography does to the male mind, then I won't understand that I could be talking to a man who can appear, because of impression management, very kind, very loving, very sympathetic, very reasonable. Love is love. Love knows boundaries, and love knows no age. And I just want to, as a matter of fact, Tanya, what I really want to do is give the kids what I never had. I'm going to role play. I just really feel a burden to help children with their self-esteem and to feel understood, because I remember as a child, I just never really felt comfortable in my own body. And, I was always playing with Barbies. Now, I'm going to go out of character for a second. How do you know any of what I'm saying is true?
Right.
Well, I look sincere, don't I? Mm-hmm. Call that a con artist. Mm-hmm. Every politician looks sincere. So I have to understand, as far as part of that, and you can tell where my little spiel was going to go. I'm going to play you for a fool because you believe I'm telling you the truth. Why? Because I look sincere. But you have no clue what a psychopath is like. They can play you for a fool. So you can have people that sound sincere, but have an agenda, which is to lower the bar on protecting and making it easier to gain access to kids, to groom them with very sexualized material. And little by little, they are manipulating and they are impacting the way kids think and the way their emotions. And before you know it, you've begun to you've unduly influenced these kids to where they're easier prey for pedophiles. And then they're going to get on the moving sidewalk of the trans movement, where sterilization, eventually amputation of body parts happens.
Right. And we're talking incrementally, and you've talked a lot about pornography. And I think I've heard you say that if there was no pornography, there would be no LGBTQ. And, as far as sexual offenses and things like this are concerned. And you've also said, that they're accomplishing affecting a child's intuition. And we are born with some natural intuition, where you say, my gut, I had this feeling in my gut that this was wrong. And now they're so perverting what it is that a child in a normal, healthy society would be able to have determined. I remember growing up, there were individuals that came to school, there was police officers and said, look, we've got black socks and, certain characteristics about they are, if anybody approaches you and they're not wearing those black socks and different things, then you have to question whether or not they're legitimately a police officer and whether you should go away with them. Like, there were certain things being instilled into us, and, there was this over-sexualizing in the school systems, these pornographic books. It all breaks down not only their intuition, but their confidence. They will begin to feel that shame, and, maybe some will feel dirty or disgusting, and then they become easier to manipulate. And this cycle starts to begin. And we are starting to pump these kids out of the school system who are not only just, mentally and physically being harmed, but it goes to that soul issue that you were talking about as well. And what I think I'd like to do right now is, because parents throughout the world, I mean, the US, Ireland, the UK, everybody is dealing with this same thing. It is really a global agenda. So we know what it is to see the videos online right now of irate parents walking into the school boards and being censored and shut down and turned away and blocked. And so what we're finding with the notice of liability, and we did this regarding the jab as well, is that we thought, okay, there has to be a sense of liability, because not everybody, not 7 out of 7 of those school trustees are pedophiles or groomers. Some of them are just those individuals that don't want to, they just are there for the job, and they don't want to create any type of trouble for themselves because they don't care about the children. So they're going along to get along. And what we're doing is we're saying, look, what you're doing to children, a notice of liability is a notice that says what you're doing is either unlawful or causing harm. And then we provide evidence of it, the criminal code. And in this situation, it's both. What they're doing is criminal and it's causing harm. And so these individuals that are going along to get along are thinking, I see the criminal code is being quoted there. I am beginning to agree that this is sexualizing and sexually exploiting children. How long do I want to carry on going along with this agenda? Then you've got the other individuals, and I want to talk to you about a couple of them: a superintendent, school board trustees, like Willow Reichelt. We've done several videos on her in the Chilliwack School District, who is denying even the conversation to address the books. And if you talk about any type of the criminal code or the legal aspect of it, she mutes people. Then you've got the person sitting next to her, Karen Bonder, whom I understand that you have done your risk assessment on. But I want to talk about somebody else. I'm going to give a scenario rather than bring up names. We have in British Columbia an individual who is a drag queen. So we dug into who this drag queen was, and it ends up that they weren't only a drag queen, they're an EA, an education assistant in the local school district. And they are also part of BC Autism Association. So we did a little more deeper dive into this person. One thing to be a drag queen, but I would encourage everybody to do this. If you know that there's going to be a drag queen in a community library or invited to a school, start doing some research on them, because you will see them proudly going across the stage in, with the most vile in the conduct, and go to their social media sites. So we did exactly that. We found videos that were not performances on stage, but videos enacting murders. This individual would murder somebody in the video. They would dismember them. Then they were grinding up their body parts and making a meal and eating them, and then feeding them to a pig, their pet pig. This pet pig happens to be a pig that is used as a prop in the municipality, in family-friendly events in the parks during the summer. We have a situation in British Columbia years ago where we had the Picton pig farmer, where he was murdering prostitutes and feeding them to their pigs. There's some very sick details about this individual. And then the social media site was filled with the most vulgar, disgusting content that I'd ever come across. And we captured all of that. So what we did is we put all this evidence together and we provided it to the school board and the school board superintendent. And I have had reports that the school board superintendent told this individual, just turn your social media off from the public and we're okay. And as far as we said, it was the videos are artistic license is what they had said. So if I'm looking at this from two scenarios. I know school trustees that are speaking up on that school board about SOGI and about the books. I know there's really good people, and so they're watching all of this unfold and doing their best to manage it. But the school superintendent has consistently covered up, supported the books, said it's based on the amendment to the Human Rights Code to include gender identity and gender expression. They're just complying, and they don't want to be in violation of the Human Rights Code. And this is the position that he's taking. Now, just to finish off, in this city, the RCMP are federal police. They're called the RCMP in Canada. The RCMP have just launched a new unit because of a surge in child pornography. The mayor was arrested a couple of months ago for sexual crimes. They waited till after the election, I believe, to arrest him. And I just saw another headline that there's a high rate of sexual exploitation of children in this same city. So there's a lot going on. I've just unpacked a little bit, but with this individual, if you were to do a risk assessment of someone like this, being around children in such an intimate environment of taking care of their every need, what would you, in a professional aspect, say about this?
I would say that if anybody doesn't take him at face value, you don't understand how to keep people safe.
Right.
So the one thing about psychopaths is this, especially sexual psychopaths. By the time somebody becomes psychopathic, especially a man, half the fun, I use that in quotes, because they're driven. People need to understand that about a psychopath. Where a decent person is driven to be of use and of benefit to others. That's why we volunteer. That's why at Christmas time we put money in the Salvation Army bucket. We just don't walk by it. Right? Why do we do that? We become charitable. There's something within us that drives us to be of benefit and to want to help. That's why we help. We volunteer. By the time somebody becomes psychopathic, it's the opposite. It's all about, and this is how they see the world. It becomes their hunting ground. And they are driven in terms of their appetites, in terms of every waking moment. People need to understand this. Every thought I think, every moment my eyes blink, I'm driven to hunt. Why? Because I'm never satisfied with the last carcass. I'm on to the next. But if I look really normal, you don't know what I'm about. That's why if I'm a financial psychopath, I will go from one hedge fund to the next to the next. If I'm a financial psychopath that I'm working churches, I will embezzle from one church and I'll move on to the next. Mm-hmm. I'll start my own church. I'll start my own next, and then I'll sell used cars and I'll start up another church. I'm bilking people out of their money. If I'm a sexual psychopath, if I'm a sociopath, it's all about notches on my belt, in a way, and how much I can get, and then I'll move on, love you and leave you. But a psychopath, again, they're motivated to scar and mar, and they're driven, they're on the hunt. And for a psychopath, half the fun is in the thrill of the hunt. They're always on the hunt, and they're driven. In Proverbs 6, it talks about they can't rest. The wicked can't rest. They're like the sea that's churning up. As a matter of fact, they will be bothered if a day goes by that they haven't caused trauma. That's what there are two ways you bother a psychopath. You limit them, and you don't allow them to get over on somebody. Okay?
Right.
So if you understand psychopaths, especially sexual psychopaths, that someone day in, day out, 24/7, is planning their next crime. But prior to it becoming public, we don't know they're perpetrating crimes, or we would have stopped them. So the day before somebody becomes a sex offender, what were they doing? Offending. They just weren't busted. What do we call them the day before they're arrested? Benjamin Levin was the Minister of Education for Ontario. He's a heinous sex offender. He's a heinous child predator. He's back on Twitter, by the way. Okay. What was discovered on his electronics was absolutely vile. But what was he the day before he was found out? He was just not busted yet, but he was just as vile. But why didn't people suspect him? Because that's how good they are. But behind the scenes, they're doing what? So I have to understand that there really are people in our midst, or churches, in the trans movement, in athletics, in education, in medicine. Think about Larry Nassar. He was what? He was the doctor for the U.S. women's gymnastics team. How old were those young ladies? Not very old, all things being equal. And he had been perping for how long? So a sophisticated predator, sexual predator, will seek out the greatest pool of potential targets. That's one thing. But they will then find positions of trust, responsibility, and authority. But trust is the most fun for them because they're first going to groom the adults in the room before they groom the kids. Not just so that they can get away with it, because they'll perp on kids as they're talking to an adult. They'll pick up a child and you think they're holding the child. Mm-hmm. Let that sink in. Okay. So you have to understand that in order to protect kids, you have to become discerning and, in a healthy way, suspicious of people. We're not jaded, but we better be suspicious. What I say is this: any man that shows an unusual interest in the sex and sexuality of kids, that's a red flag. Why? Think about in the average marriage counseling, 2 primary complaints by the wife toward the husband. He won't talk to me. He won't spend time with the kids. He won't even go out and play ball with them. If you have a man that appears to be a child magnet, distracts these kids, that's a red flag. You need to understand that. And on top of it, if he seems fixated about what? Wanting to help kids with their sexuality, that's an additional red flag. You had better be mindful. Third, if he acts sexually deviant, what does that look like? Well, he's probably, think about the way he's acting and envision what he was accessing online the night before, then multiply it by 10, heading downward on the slippery slope. So if you see a man twerking on stage in front of kids, or dressed as a pup, which is an animal, what do you think he's looking at online? Or dressed as a baby with diapers on, or dressed in women's underwear, no man thinks it's a reasonable proposition to dress in women's underwear and drag unless he has saturated himself in thousands of hours of pornography.
Right.
That's what people need to understand. Underlying all sex offenses is pornography. It's deviance that is supercharged through pornography and the internet. And unless people understand it changes the brains of a man into a hunter, then you will assume he's a sensitive man who just wants to help kids be safe. Really. And he's playing you for a fool.